How's it going, everyone? I am Dylan. This is All You Can Board, and I am back with another Marvel Champions video. This is the second one I've posted in the last couple days. The first one was Colossus. This is Shadowcat, the second hero that comes in the Mutant Genesis pack. There's still going to be a third review, I guess a third and a fourth. The third is going to be Cyclops, which came in its own separate hero pack at the same time, and then the fourth will be an entire review of Mutant Genesis. That'll take a little bit longer for me to get out. If you're curious about Phoenix, I mentioned this in the Colossus video. It was delayed here in Canada. I'm not sure what other places in the world, but we're not going to get it until late in October. So once I do have it in my hands, you can be sure I will give you all my thoughts. Let's jump into Shadowcat. We're going to start with the alter ego, which is Kitty Pryde. 3 recovery, a 6 hand size, 9 hit points. Setup, put your mass form upgrade into play solid side face up. We'll get to what that is in a second. Phase control is the ability action, flip your mass form upgrade, limit once per round. So obviously you can tell already just based on the alter ego, everything here has to do with your mass form upgrade card and flipping to different sides. We've seen something akin to this with a couple other heroes in the game. Shadowcat is yet another hero that's going to utilize that and use different effects depending which side it's on. Let's jump into the hero side, which is Shadowcat. 2s across the board for the stat line. That is really, really good for a stat line. Selective intangibility is the ability. While you are in phased mass form, Shadowcat ignores the guard and patrol keywords and any crisis icons in play. Now, I talked about this in the preview. That's obviously really, really good. It is very situational because not only do you have to have cards in play that you are getting some benefit out of ignoring, you also have to be in the phased mass form. Now, part of me thinks this could have just been an inherent ability in Shadowcat. Regardless of which form you're in, you will ignore the guard, patrol, and crisis icons. I don't think that actually would have been too powerful because it is very selective and depends on the scenario you're facing. But I'm also not, the one playtesting everything. I could be wrong. Regardless, it is situational. It's not always going to feel like you have an ability. It's not always going to feel super powerful, but it is more beneficial than I actually think I thought it was going to be coming into, especially the Mutant Genesis expansion. There are a lot of situations where not being able to ignore those icons and those guard and patrol keywords and whatnot make things a lot more difficult. So having that flexibility to say, I don't even have to worry about this, was actually really good. Again, it's just going to be selective and it's not always going to feel overly powerful because of that. Okay, let's jump into the mass form upgrade because this is important to understand. So this is obviously a card with 2 different sides. Let's start with the solid side. The solid side is mass form permanent. Hero resource, exhaust this card to generate a strength resource specifically for an attack or defense event. So you start the game with this in play. Anytime you're on the solid side, you're going to be able to exhaust it to be able to generate an extra resource, which is essentially like almost having another card in your hand that you're just using for a resource. That's really good to have that in play from the start of the game just without having to do anything. Really, really awesome. Again, you have to be able to flip it to the right side to utilize it, but as you get better with playing Shadowcat and utilizing the ability to flip when you need it to be on a certain side, that'll be less of a barrier to get into situations where you're like, oh, I want to use this but it's on the wrong side. You'll get better at managing that. Response after you attack or defend in solid mass form, though, you flip this card. So that's one of the ways that this is going to flip. Probably the most consistent way this is going to flip. When it flips, it goes into phased form. Phased form says while Shadowcat is defending, she cannot take damage. You will ignore all damage while defending, which is really insanely good. Force response is, again, once you attack or defend, flip this card. So that's going to be the main way you're flipping this card, is just by using attack and defend events. You're going to be flipping back and forth. You just have to time that and do it in the right order to essentially be able to get the maximum value out of generating resources, about hopefully ending in phased form so that you can defend if you need to and not take any damage. That's sort of the puzzle you're trying to solve every time you're playing Shadowcat. That being said, both sides of the card are good, and it can't be overstated. Ignoring all damage when defending, especially if you're playing a protection build or a build that's really benefiting from your additional defense you're going to be doing, that is really, really good. All right, the first card, the signature ally, is Lockheed. This is a 2-cost ally with 2 health, 1 thwart, 1 attack, so small across the board, but the ability is anything but. After Lockheed enters play, if you are in solid mass form, deal 2 damage. If you are in phased mass form, remove 2 threat. Now, that may not seem like overly flashy, overly powerful, but for a cheap 2-cost ally to also be able to do 2 damage or to remove 2 threat and have the flexibility to be able to time which one you want to do, and then get the blocker on top of that. That's just a really solid 2-cost ally. 2-cost allies are always going to be good off the hop because they can block for cheap. You're essentially negating the entire attack. You usually get an activation of either a small attack or thwart as well. But to have an ability that's essentially adding 2 to what that attack or that thwart, depending on what you choose, is just really good. That's just a solid card. It's not going to be win awards necessarily for best signature ally, but it's going to be one that's just reliably getting you out of jams and being able to be efficient for 2 cost. Then we've got Kitty's Room. This is a 1-cost support alter ego action. Exhaust Kitty's Room. If you are in solid mass form, heal 2 damage. If you're in phased mass form, draw a card. Really awesome support card. This is just one of those support cards that once you get into play early, you're going to use it all the time. You're always going to be in one of those forms. So regardless of which form you're in, even if you didn't time it perfectly right, as long as you have damage to heal, you're always going to get something out of it. And healing an additional 2 damage on top of your recovery of 3, potentially, really good. You're essentially getting that free 4 heal, because if you use this right when you flip to alter ego and then you use it at the start of the next turn, you're healing 4 for free. Really, really solid. And if you happen to be in phased mass form, drawing 1 card is just really, really good. You always get an extra card draw, and having more flexibility that you can do on your turn is never a bad thing. So really solid support card. One of those cards that for 1 cost, if you get that in your opening hand, it's hitting the table immediately, or even in your first few. I mean, you can get that out. It's just going to facilitate so much for you for the course of the game. All right, then we've got Acute Control. This is a 1-cost upgrade. After you ignore the guard or patrol keyword on a minion, exhaust this to deal 2 damage to that minion. So this is where, if you have put yourself in a situation where you're constantly able to ignore those keywords, whether it's because of the scenario you're playing or utilizing some of your other cards, you're constantly going to have this source of dealing 2 damage to a minion. And yes, it's specifically targeted at a minion, but being able to maybe have this card help you deal with the minion situation on the board without having to actually use your powerful cards and your actual base abilities, and you can focus all that on the schemes on the villain, is just really, really good. So this is playing really hard into the situational aspect of Shadowcat, but when you're going to hit, that is just a really solid card to have in play, and it's cheap too, only 1 cost. Then we've got Intangible Interference, another 1-cost upgrade. After you ignore the crisis icon on a scheme, exhaust this to remove 2 threat from that scheme. So very, very similar, but just this specifically targeting those schemes that normally are standing in your way between the main scheme, you and the main scheme. Now every time you ignore those, you're getting an additional removing 2 threat from that scheme, which is just a really, really good. You're dealing with the scheme that you probably want to allow other characters to be able to target the main scheme, while you ignore it and deal with the main scheme. Really, really good, especially if you're the one that's being relied on to deal with some of the threat and take care of that situation. Just Shadowcat is really good at, yes, this is a situational ability that is only going to come into play sometimes, but when it does, she shines so much that she's going to take center stage, and that's just a really exciting kind of hero to have in the game. All right, 2 copies of Phased and Confused, great card name. 3-cost upgrade, hero form only, attached to an enemy, max 1 per enemy. When attached enemy would attack, discard this card instead, then confuse that enemy. This is a really, really good card. It is a bit expensive, but I never had any regrets playing this. Like, it will very often cost you a large chunk, if not more than half of your hand, if you don't have other ways to generate resources, or you don't have any strength or genius resource cards. But essentially being able to negate an entire attack from an enemy, so know that the next attack that comes through is completely 100% negated, and on top of that, the enemy then becomes confused. You can do things where essentially you're negating the entire villain round, because you're putting this on a villain, and they're going to attack first, and because one of your heroes is in a hero form, one is an alter ego, they attack, that's negated, they get a confused card. Now when they go to scheme, that confused card negates the scheme, and you've essentially negated that entire turn. If you're playing solo, you're able to negate the attack coming towards you, finish next turn in alter ego form, and negate that scheme coming towards you. Like, that can't be overstated. And for 3, yes, it's a steep cost, but you get that value right back. You just have to be able to afford this card to do it. I love this card. I think it's great, and it was one of my surprises of the deck, because I think I undervalued it a little bit because of the steeper cost, thinking, yeah, it's good, but how often am I going to be willing to pay that? The answer is I was willing to pay it a lot, and it always seemed to benefit me. 3 copies of Shadowcat Surprise. This is a 2-cost event that says deal 3 damage to an enemy and ready your hero. It is a really simple card. You're only doing 3 damage for 2. That's by no means anywhere close to some of the higher power level cards we've seen in hero-specific cards, but getting that additional ready on Shadowcat is really, really powerful, especially because she has a pretty solid base stat line. So even if you factor that in with the extra 2 attack you're getting, this becomes 2 for 5 essentially, if you look at it that way. It's a cheap card. You might be able to get multiple activations of Shadowcat Surprise on the same turn and kind of add to that. You have flexibility because you don't have to just do it for an attack. You can be setting yourself up to defend now, and we know that in phased form you can completely negate on that defend. The readying could be that you defended and now your hero is spent and now you're able to deal 3 damage and ready again. So there's just tons of flexibility. You get 3 copies, you're going to have tons of opportunities to use it, and it's just a really solid card. Then we've got 2 copies of Phased Strike. Phased Strike is a 3-cost event that says deal 6 damage to an enemy. If you are in phased mass form, you may discard an attachment with the text hero action or hero response from that enemy. This is a surprisingly versatile card. First of all, 6 damage with 3 is pretty good. Yes, we've seen better, but I just think that's still a solid amount of damage for 3, and you're still going to feel happy doing that. The condition to be in a phased mass form is not hard to time. You can easily time that in such a way that you will make sure you're in the right form to trigger this, so that's not really a problem. Getting a free removal of a beneficial attachment that's on an enemy that otherwise you would have had to have spent a bunch of resources from your hand, or potentially like it just wouldn't have been feasible for you to find a way to remove it without really slowing down what you want to do, is actually so good. Yes, it's situational, and so much about this hero is situational, but wow, was that a surprising thing to realize how powerful that was. And maybe that's my naivety from like not noticing that right from the preview, but in practice, in the game, being able to play that card and now get rid of this attachment doesn't slow me down whatsoever, sets the villain back from where they were, because that was potentially an encounter card that was dealt and that should have been a bigger impact. Now it's just gone from me doing something I would have done anyways and dealing 6 damage on top of it. Just a really solid card. 2 copies of Airwalk, a 1-cost event that says remove 2 threat from a scheme, but 4 threat instead if you're in phased mass form. It's a really simple card. You're almost never going to use it if you're not in phased form unless you really, really need to remove 2 threat. And I mean, having that flexibility obviously is still good, but removing 4 for 1 is really, really good. And again, it's not hard to really time being in the right form for it. You just have to kind of get a feel for, using Shadowcat, what order you use abilities in. But generally, you'll have an easy way to flip over to phased if you're not already there. And then removing 4 threat for 1 is just really, really good. Finally, we've got 2 copies of Quick Shift. 0-cost event, defense, when an enemy attacks. If you are in solid mass form, change to phased mass form. Phased mass form, draw 2 cards. So again, the reason you'd want to change to phased form is because you then negate all damage on defense. So essentially this is allowing you to shift into the right form that you want to be in to completely soak up that hit and do nothing. If you're already in phased mass form, you're already going to be able to do that and soak that up. And now you just get to draw 2 cards for 0, which is unreal. This is just a solid card. You're always going to have a reason to use it. You don't have to try to justify using it because you think, oh, I'm going to spend a bunch of resources from my hand. Is my next offensive turn going to be slower? You're spending a single card, and really there's a way for you to draw 2 back. So you're actually in a better position than you were before. So it's just a really good card all around. All right, Wolverine, a really popular hero here in ally form. 4 cost, 4 health, 1 thwart, 3 attack with 2 consequential damage on that attack. Wolverine's attacks gain piercing. Response after your turn begins, heal 1 damage from Wolverine. It is a bit of more of an expensive ally, but having that heal and with all the cards we have been given now, the training cards to be able to upgrade allies, there's a lot you can do with Wolverine if you set it up properly. You're going to be healing the consequential damage off of him if you want to use him just for a bunch of higher attacks. You're going to be able to, if you've boosted his health, soak up more hits, heal some of that back, keep him in play longer, soaking up multiple hits while still doing attacks. There's just a ton of flexibility in Wolverine. You have to build around it. You don't really have to build around it, but if you do build around to get the full potential of Wolverine, you have to build around it a little bit. You want to include some of those training cards, but really we've been given so many tools that I don't think that's really that much of a barrier, that hard to do, and I think you're gonna have a lot of success with it as long as you can justify paying for a 4-cost ally or cheating that ally out a little bit quicker, which we've been given other ways to do that as well. Really solid ally. Then we've got Magik. 3 cost, 3 health, 1 thwart to attack. After you play Magik from your hand, spend a mind resource, choose a non-elite minion engaged with an X-Men hero, shuffle that minion into the encounter deck. A little bit situational, but if you ever end up with one of those really nasty minions that you think, yeah, I could deal with this, but it's going to slow me down, I'm going to have to spend my turn doing that, it's going to prevent me from doing what I want to do with the villain or the schemes, being able to just throw Magik in play and just get rid of that minion, shuffle it into the deck. You'll have to deal with it later maybe, but there's no guarantees you even will, and it's just gone from the board. That's just really solid, and all it really costs you is the mind resource, and then you still get an ally in play to block. So situational, but when that situation hits, it's going to feel like a really solid play to put Magik into play. All right, speaking of training cards, 3 copies of Attack Training. So this is attached to an X-Men ally, max 1 training upgrade per ally. Attached ally gets +1 attack and +2 hit points. This is like the protection one that I believe comes in Colossus. That one gives you +3 hit points. This one you're essentially trading 1 hit point for 1 attack. I prefer that. I like that better. I mean, it's really comes down to your playstyle and what game you're in, which one's going to be better. But having the flexibility of adding 2 health hit points is a big enough deal that could just soak up a minion hit right there. And now you're still getting an attack boost that you can do more with. Like, imagine this on Wolverine, right? Now you have a base 4 attack. Yes, 2 consequential damage, but you know Wolverine's going to heal one every turn, and you've given him 2 extra hit points. So he's got 6 hit points, 4 attack, healing 1 every turn. I mean, you get so much mileage out of Wolverine now where you almost don't want to block with that ally at all. Now you just want to leave that in play and do 4 damage every single turn for 5 turns, essentially, because you keep healing 1 back. Really, really solid card. Or maybe I got like calculation wrong. Maybe it's not 5 turns, but regardless, it's more than a couple, and it's going to feel really good. So the attack training and these training cards in general are really, really good, and they're allowing these X-Men allies that are being introduced to just get so much more mileage and so much more longevity out of them. I love their inclusion. They're really cheap. It's hard to justify, or it's hard not to justify playing them. All right, Gatekeeper, 3 copies. This is a 0 cost upgrade attached to a minion. Attached minion gets +2 hit points and gains patrol. When attached minion is defeated, though, remove 4 threat from the main scheme. This card it's an interesting card because you're essentially powering up the minion for 2. For buy 2 for 0 and giving them patrol. And the upside here is that you're essentially you're hopefully going to do it to a minion that you're going to defeat right away, and you're removing 4 threat for 0. Is that worth it? In Shadowcat specifically, yes, because Shadowcat has all these benefits of ignoring patrol keywords. So it's great that it comes in this deck. You're going to have tons of opportunities to use it. I don't know outside of Shadowcat how. It's beneficial because it's aggression. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. In an aggression deck, if you're playing solo, to have this guaranteed way to remove 4 threat, 4-0 in a deck that if you're playing aggression, you probably have a lot of ways to deal damage. It's probably not a huge deal that they gain +2 hit points. So at that point, being able to do something you were going to do anyways, remove this minion, and now freely get 4 threat removed as well, can make it so that you have a more successful solo game. No question about that. There's that potential there. Outside of that situation, playing an aggression hero who needs, threat removal help in a solo scenario. Outside of that, I don't know how much use it's going to see besides like Shadowcat, but it's just a cool inclusion, even if it is situational. And in those solo games, I think it's going to benefit certain types of decks where they just need that support because they don't have a Justice hero to help them out. 3 copies of Team Strike. This is a 1-cost event. Play only if your identity has the X-Men trait. Hero action, exhaust your hero and any number of X-Men allies. Deal X damage among enemies in play, where X is the total attack of the characters exhausted this way. This is basically just a cheap way to get a whole bunch of extra mileage use out of your allies without having to have them take consequential damage. You're exhausting them still. They're still being used. They're not taking that consequential damage, and you're adding it all up and dealing it out to the enemies that are in play, among the enemies in play. It is a solid card if you're playing a deck, a build where you're going to have a bunch of X-Men allies in play, and this is another way for you to extend their life, essentially. Not have to use them, not have to, in case of Wolverine, now you're going to get a heal without having to even take any consequential damage that turn. You're really getting him back up. So it is just a card that's super versatile. It's going to see a lot of use. It has tons of ways to create interesting decks sort of around it and utilizing allies in an aggression build. Normally we see that in leadership. This is kind of allowing you to do that in an aggression now. It's just a really interesting card. All right, then we've got 2 copies of Aggressive Energy. This is a resource card, max 2 per deck. When you spend this card to play an attack event, that event deals 1 additional damage. This is kind of like the protection one. We're seeing these across the board, and basically, if you pay for something that is inherently something we're going to be doing with this with aggression anyways, you're now getting an additional damage as a reward. So yes, it's only 1 damage. If you look at it as like just paying 1 resource to deal 1 damage, that, you know, might not seem very good, but you're going to have to use a resource to pay for this attack event anyways. If you're, instead of now cashing in a card that has another use, you're cashing in a resource card that's just giving you an extra damage. So the trade-off is good. It's good that there's only 2 in the deck. I don't think you'd want any more than that. It's not going to fit into every single situation, every deck you're doing, but having it be a wild resource is another benefit as well. It's just a cool, solid card that I think is going to shine in certain decks and maybe, you know, feel a little bit, you know, a little bit more inferior in other decks, but it's cool to have it. Okay, basic cards. We're looking at Colossus, basic ally here, 4 cost, 3 health, 1 thwart, 3 attack, but 2 consequential damage on the attack. Reduce the cost to play Colossus by 1 if your identity is the mutant or X-Men trait, toughness. Essentially, you're not going to play Colossus if you are not playing a character with a mutant or X-Men trait. If you do, which you will, I'm telling you, you will, this is essentially 3 costs. So it's 3 costs for 3 health, 1 thwart, 3 attack with toughness. That is just a solid stat line. Yes, there's 2 consequential damage on the attack. You can have the tough status card, soak that up, and essentially get an additional attack before Colossus needs to block, which will then be 6 damage for 3 and a block. Really solid stat line and ratio per damage there. Toughness can obviously just soak up an entire hit that could be massive before you even have to block. You get 2 blocks of Colossus. There's just tons of versatility there, and it fits the theme of like the Colossus hero as well. I like the card. I think it's going to see use in a lot of X-Men builds. Outside of X-Men builds, I just don't think you use it. X-Mansion, 2 cost support, alter ego action, exhaust the X-Mansion to heal 1 damage from a mutant or X-Men character. Any player whose alter ego has the mutant trait may trigger this ability. This is just a really flexible support that kind of, helps out with the builds that we're seeing that they're facilitating with cards like Teamwork and some solid allies like Wolverine, where you're just gonna get so much more time with them in play with healing. And this is also allowing you to, if you're playing multiplayer, say, well, now anyone else who is now playing X-Men characters and has this mutant trait can also benefit from this card as well. So it's versatile. It's not going to be included across the board because it has to be in a deck specifically where you are going to have an ally focus of some kind that you're going to be able to get the mileage of this and justify playing it. But in those builds specifically, it's just going to be really, really good. I'm not going to talk about Shadow and Steel here because I did talk about it in the Colossus video. If you're curious about my thoughts, go check it out there, but it is still just as good here as it is there. All right, the obligation, permanently phased. Flip your mass form upgrade to phased because you're permanently phased. You cannot attack, defend, or change mass form. You can't basically do anything. Well, you can do some stuff, nothing interesting. Alter ego action, exhaust Kitty Pryde, remove permanently phased from the game. So this one is not one that has a choice. You are going to be hindered by this. You're going to not be able to do pretty much anything when this is of value to the game when this is in play. But all you have to do to get rid of it is just exhaust, and you're going to permanently remove this from the game. So essentially, what this obligation is doing is saying you're going to exhaust this turn, and you're going to like it. I guess is the best way to put it. All right, the Nemesis minion here is a White Queen. 1 scheme, 1 attack, 5 health. Villainous, when White Queen is engaged with you, you are confused. Boost, you are confused. All the White Queen does is confuse you, and as long as you are engaged with the White Queen, you're confused. That's a cool mechanic. It's really nasty, really a huge pain, especially if this lands on a hero that you are relying on, being the person that's removing threat, whatever the case may be, if you're playing like a Justice Shadowcat build, for instance. But regardless, just a really nasty card to have to deal with. Not too hard to deal with at 5 health, but still not super easy either. I really like the flavor of this of this Nemesis card. I just like the idea that as long as you're engaged, you're confused. It's just a neat mechanic. All right, the Hellfire Club side scheme. 2 threat per player. When defeated, the player who defeated this scheme searches the encounter deck, discard pile, and set aside area for a copy of the Hellfire Pawn minion and puts it into play, engage them. We'll get to what the Hellfire Pawn minion is right away. Essentially, all this does is it's in play, it's giving you an acceleration token, which is nasty, and if you want to get rid of that acceleration token, you have to defeat it and have to deal with a Hellfire Pawn minion. So what's Hellfire Pawn? Well, there's 2 of them. 1 scheme, 2 attack, 3 health, guard, patrol, and surge, and it even has a boost to put Hellfire Pawn into play, engaged. You're going to get dealt this card one way or another. It has guard and patrol, which luckily Shadowcat can choose to ignore, but otherwise it's going to be a bit of a pain, and it surges into something else on top of that. Just one of those really, really annoying minions. It's not like it's overly powerful, super easy to deal with at 2 health, but just really, really annoying. And then we've got Telepathic Restraint. So this is an attachment attached to your identity. When Telepathic Restraint is attached to your identity, you're stunned. Action, spend 2 mind resources to discard this card. So this is kind of like the being engaged with the White Queen and being confused. This goes attached to your character, and as long as it's attached, you're stunned. And to get rid of it, to not be stunned, you're gonna have to spend 2 mind resources. Everything about the White Queen's little set there is just annoying. And really, that's kind of the best thing you can hope for with the whole Nemesis set, minion, side scheme, all that kind of stuff, is you just want it to be really, really annoying so that when Shadows of the Past hits and all these cards get into the deck and they start coming out, you're just like, oh my god, this game has just been taken to another difficulty level, annoyance level by having to deal with these cards. It's just, it fits that mold. I really like this Nemesis set that came with Shadowcat. That is it. So what are my thoughts on Shadowcat? Shadowcat is definitely the less, in my opinion, and this is obviously just my opinion, is for me the less interesting of the two by a decent margin. I think Colossus has so much more flavor and theme going on and is just way more fun to play and offers way more, you know, huge turns and cool moments of having to manage this tough status card resource. Shadowcat has the form card, but we've seen something like that before, so it's not super unique, and her inherent ability of ignoring those keywords is really cool, and it can be really flexible, but it's so situational that it's hard to get overly excited about a hero that you might on certain games just feel lackluster, because it's like, oh, I don't have anything to ignore here, and oh, I'm just managing this one phase card. To me, managing the tough status cards and the benefits that come from that was way better than managing the phase form and the benefits that came from that. But I will say, being able to negate all damage when defending, really good. Having the generation of an extra resource right from the start, also really good. Like, Shadowcat is not a bad hero. That's not at all what I'm saying. It's a solid hero, and as someone who might be starting with Mutant Genesis, like, you know, your first introduction to Marvel Champions maybe, it's a good hero to include in the box. I just think over time, and with so many heroes already introduced in the game that are super powerful, it's going to be hard for Shadowcat to really compete and not on a power level, but maybe on an interest level, as like one of the ones that people gravitate towards and have fun with. There's just so much stiff competition out there, and there's going to be more as these other X-Men heroes get released, and I think that's where Shadowcat falls for me, is just falls a little bit short of some of the other heroes we've gotten recently, and it specifically falls short of Cyclops and Colossus, which I both think are more interesting to play. That is my review of Shadowcat. Thanks so much for watching. If you haven't checked out Colossus's video, I did post that before. You can see the link either above or at the end of this video and go check out Colossus. Cyclops is coming as well, and then that'll be the 3 heroes that were released. And then, like I said, I'll have my review of the Mutant Genesis pack likely next weekend. I need some more time to be able to go through it all. If not next weekend, early next week, you'll see my full review of the expansion. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next time.